Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, fellow history lovers. Hope you're doing well. My name is Michael C. Hardy. I would like to welcome you to my library Sunday night history chat. The first time in 7 years it has strictly been on YouTube. I hope everybody is doing really well. If you are on YouTube with me, drop me a note. Let me know where you're watching from. I would love to see your name pop up on that screen over there as we jump into our conversation here in a couple of minutes. Apologize for not meeting with y'all last Sunday night. We spent last weekend at Natural Tunnel State Park in someplace in Virginia, Duffield, Virginia. And at their blockhouse at their colonial event. And after a full day on Friday and a full day on, no, not on Friday, a full day on Saturday and a full day on Sunday, we probably had 450 people total come through our camp. Isabella was running the tavern. You know, me and Elizabeth are so proud. Our 17-year-old daughter tending bar, and Elizabeth was talking about the Sugar Act, and I was talking about the Stamp Act, and it went really, really, really well. We had a great time, and I was just tired and didn't feel like coming down here and sitting and chatting with y'all. And I put that I was historied out, and several people said, "How can you be historied out?" And after that much talking in 2 days, I didn't have much left to say. But we had a great weekend, a fantastic time. The time traveling Hardys. If you're on Facebook, you can check out the Time Traveling Hardys Facebook page and continue to follow along with some of our adventures as we travel around and do living history and interpretive programs on various places. I want to say good evening to Ryan and Robert and David Pope and our friends in Greensboro and Hardy Flanagan down in Eastern North Carolina and Bobby Goodson all the way from Arkansas. Hope everybody is doing really, really well this evening. And I hope it's a beautiful day where you are, like it is here in Western North Carolina this evening. Bunch of events coming up in the near future. Nothing else going on this weekend, even though I will be at UNC Greensboro this upcoming Saturday for an event. Not really my event, but I will be there for an event. And then after that, we've got some trips speaking at Roundtable in Virginia and SCV camp and an MOS&B camp in South Carolina or chapter in South Carolina. So if I'm coming to a town near you, let's get together and chat and let's talk history. So many of you know that I have been working on this North Carolina aviation book. It's going really well. It's not going fast enough. It's technically due at the end of May. I just looked that up a few minutes ago. I've got about 20,000 words on paper, and I need about 27,000 more words in like the next month. That would be really nice. But one of the cool things that I found recently as I was reading along was this story. I've been reading this book by Paramore called First to Fly, North Carolina in the Beginning of Aviation. And he's got this really small blurb in there by a man whose name was R.D. Davidson or R.O. Davidson. We don't even really know who what his first name really was, because I've seen both Roderick and I have seen Richard in different accounts. But he, even though this is not connected to North Carolina, it is connected to the 1860s. Actually, it's connected before then. In the 1840s, this man, Davidson, actually had an idea of creating this steam-powered airplane that would probably have wings that flapped, kind of like a bird, because he'd been studying eagles. And he actually published a pamphlet in 1840 that is called Disclosure of the Discovery and Invention and a Description of the Plan of Construction and Mode of Operation of the Aerostat, or a New Mode of Aerostation. That was the name of the title of his pamphlet in the 1840. And his idea was to create this flapping wing machine patterned after the American eagle. And there are a lot of ideas to create both lighter than air aircraft like balloons and heavier than air aircraft like airplanes and helicopters that we associate in our time period here in the 21st century. But Davidson had this idea of creating this thing, and he first went to the Confederate government, and the Confederate government were not interested in his idea. The idea was that you could build this thing, an artificial bird that was steam powered, that could carry a man and a number of shells, which he could drop on the Federal soldiers in and around Petersburg. By late 1843, the federal government knows of this plan. And there's a publication called the Army and Navy Gazette, and they ran an article, and then the article was reprinted in January of 1864 in the newspaper in Louisville, Kentucky, describing about how Davidson wanted to build this fleet of 1,000 machines that would be stationed 5 miles from the enemy's lines, and that when they were launched, each airplane or aerostat would carry a 50-pound explosive shell to be dropped from a safe elevation on the Federal lines. Then the birds would return, and they would be reloaded, and they would take off, and they would drop another round of explosives. Davidson believed that he could drop 150,000 shells in the course of 12 hours with his 1,000 aerostats. That was his belief. So he went to the Confederate government. The Confederate government, of course, as we get into 1864, doesn't really have any money. And they probably said, oh, that's an absolutely harebrained idea. We're not going to back that. So Davidson, in turn, goes to the Confederate Army, the Army of Northern Virginia. And there with the Army of Northern Virginia, he starts giving lectures about the necessity of this craft and about how it will work. He even built a model there in Richmond of the model, or he built a model of the aircraft in Richmond. He raised an estimated $1,500 by giving these lectures in the camps of the various Confederate armies. And there in and around Richmond, he'd go by brigade by brigade by brigade. Some soldiers, Confederate soldiers, thought it was a great idea. There was one member of Benning's brigade who wrote that, quote, I was very anxious to see that man stampede the Yankee army. And another Confederate soldier wrote, quote, that there was an intense excitement and joyous hopes pervading the army that the flying bird would exterminate every Yankee in front of the Petersburg trenches. Of course, like some of you this evening, there were folks who were not impressed. A member of another Confederate brigade, after the brigade had committed or subscribed $127 to the project, this man considered the sum, quote, pretty liberal patronage for a humbug. So one of those remarkable stories. So he built that model in Petersburg, and people could come by, and I imagine for $1 you could look in at it or something like that. That's kind of normal with the airplane crowd early on. And then apparently there was some type of storm in Petersburg, and the thing was damaged, and the model was wrecked. Be great to know if it was a full-size model or if it was a smaller model. A lot of times these early men who are building both lighter than air and then heavier than air aircraft will build a smaller model just to demonstrate their idea. I don't know that from the surviving records. Great question is, what happened to Davidson? I don't know. The theory is, like I said when we first started this evening, we can't even agree on the man's name. Was his name Roderick or was his name Richard? he might have been born in Virginia in 1806, and he might have died in Virginia in an almshouse, which is a poorhouse, in December of 1885 of Bright's disease. I don't know if that's the right person. He's kind of a mystery there about his origins, his engineering background. Um, I don't know. But he obviously, the pamphlet that he published in 1840 about his aerostat was actually published in St. Louis. It's a small pamphlet. So that would be a fascinating thing to dig more research out on him. Now, I consulted a couple of other books, and you can read my whole post tomorrow on looking for the Confederate War. I was able to dig some things out of period newspapers. I found some stuff in Lee's Miserables by Powell, which is a fantastic book. Earl Hess has a paragraph or two in his book, In the Trenches of Petersburg. So there is some stuff out there on it. Jason asks, is there a drawing of the prototype? There is a drawing of some type of prototype. I have a book on Confederate patents, and I went through that book, and I did not see a patent that dealt with that device. I don't know that. I don't know if he built if he applied for a patent. I couldn't find it in that book, and it's a pretty comprehensive book about the Confederates and their patent office and how it worked and who did get a patent. And yes, there is a book on Confederate patents. It's called Confederate Inventions. I found that book when I was in Gettysburg back in October last year when I was there for the Savas Beatty author gathering. There is this really strange picture. Let me see if I can pull it up. And I don't know if I'm going to use this or not, because I'm not clear if this was if this was someone else's idea of what this proposal in the 1840s of building flying machines. But let's see if we can figure out how to share. Oh, yeah, that looks good. So y'all pardon me with just 1 second. I should have already pulled this up, but I didn't. So that's an 1840 image of a thing called the Great Steam Duck. I don't know if this was just caricature. As you can see, it looks like a duck, and we've got exhaust coming out of the rear end of the duck, and it's got wings that flap. I don't know. What do you think? But that's one of those proposals. This is from 1841. May or may not be Davidson's flying contraption. I'm not really sure on that. But pretty wild stuff. Of course, we understand a little bit about the balloon and the balloon warfare. Professor Lowe, especially balloon warfare during the 7 Days campaigns, when Lowe and others would go up on the federal side of the lines with telegraph operators and would telegraph messages to back to federal headquarters about what they were seeing on the Confederate lines. There was some work on the Confederate Balloon Corps, but once again, the resources like the silk to make the balloons and the ability to manufacture the gas to put in the balloons was quite a bit of a challenge for the Southerners during the war. Robert, I like your comment, duck drone. Hard to believe that somebody would have been inside of that thing flying it around, but that was the plan. And there are a lot of crazy ideas, as I have discovered as I've worked on this aviation book, a lot of crazy ideas. Now, this information will not be in my book. It is not connected to North Carolina whatsoever. But really just kind of crazy things going on there. Jason, they did have a balloon corps like the Army of the Potomac, but it was not very successful. And maybe we'll talk about that again here in the near future. That's something I would love to do. I think it's Niels is talking about the Confederate Secret Service, and a variety of sabotage plots, including using Greek fire to burn hotels in New York, which is true. Don't forget that the Federals were using Greek fire when they bombarded Charleston, South Carolina in 1863, 1864. So the whole Greek fire concept. And there's a really great book on chemical warfare and the war that I would encourage you to check out. Not a very big book either. And I would send Miss Elizabeth to go get it. But since I've rearranged things, I'm not 100% sure where that is, except it's over there on that wall someplace. But that's okay. I can drop that later. Actually, the book is called Villainous Compounds. But it talks a lot about the use of Greek fire by the Federals and the Confederates, and kind of that whole idea of chemical warfare. And I would encourage you to check that book out. Small book, very interesting read. So going back through, looking at comments. Is our friend Andrea in Rockport, Massachusetts. I hope things are well. Andrea, there's a small chance we might be in your neighborhood in June. We'll have to wait and see if that pans out. But, just one of those little pieces of the war. I'm curious if you have ever heard of this idea to create this airplane, for lack of a better word. And I thought the idea of being just 5 miles and dropping bombs on the federal defenses. I mean, that is straight World War One. Both the Germans and the Americans and British and French did that. They would have airplanes as spotters and airplanes gathering intelligence, and eventually got around to having airplanes dropping small bombs on the lines. So, have you ever heard of Davidson and the idea to bomb the federal lines? I don't know. I know of course, I've read First to Fly before, and I've read the Least Miserable books by Powell, and I've read Into the Trenches at Petersburg by Hess. So I've obviously come across it before. Our friend David Pope is saying that he thinks that Freeman mentioned it in Lee's Lieutenants, which may be true. I haven't read that in a long time. So I've obviously come by this story in the past, but I read it again this past 2 or 3 days, and I thought that would make a great thing to talk about here on Sunday Night History Chat, and would make a great post over on Looking for the Confederate War. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the idea of using the Great Steam Duck to drop bombs on the Confederate lines. Just one of those other little pieces of history. I had an interesting conversation going with our friend Cindy a few days ago. Was talking about history and how little we know, which of course is one of my big things. And was chatting with her about that, and she was talking about teaching school kids, I assume 8th graders, and was talking about World War II and about how the German submarines were sinking Allied, mostly U.S. merchant ships, but not always U.S. merchant ships along the North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, other places coast during the early part of our involvement in World War II. And she said the kids didn't believe her until they went and consulted Google. And at first I was like, oh, well, I don't know about that. Consulting Google. When I was a kid, we'd go consult in the Encyclopedia Britannica or something. But I don't know. But when I put this article up tomorrow morning, I'll have all my notes there like I usually do. And you can maybe track down that information and find something else. And who knows, maybe one student one day when they go to Google something a teacher tells them because they don't believe it, they'll stumble across that post. And maybe, just maybe, we can help educate somebody else. Andrea, I will not know until, I really won't know, definitely until the 1st of May, and then we'll have to figure out where we're actually going when it comes to 1st of June. But I owe Isabella a trip to the Harvard Observatory, and so we'll see if we make it that far north. There's our friend John Blankenship. John, I hope you are doing so well. Thank you for joining me last month on Sunday Night History Chat. Next Sunday, Lord willing, we will have our friend MJ, who portrays a spy by the name of Pauline Cushman. And we're going to be talking about spies in the 1860s. And we may go even other places like Culpeper Spy Ring, or I don't know, some other spies out there someplace. So if you're around next Sunday Night History Chat, probably here on YouTube. I think I'm giving up on Facebook. But Elizabeth's going to tell me if there are any Facebook conversations going on the channel.
No, I don't see anything on Facebook.
Okay. She's over there monitoring that as we chat this evening. Jason's been reading Samuel Mitchum's book on the Red River Campaign. Would there have been, if Taylor could have captured more of Banks' corps, would there have been different outcomes in the Atlanta and the Shenandoah campaign? I don't know. I don't know if it would be better or not. That's a great question. Been a long time since I've read anything on the Red River campaign. It seems, this is not a definitive statement, but it seems that anything that takes place in that area, Trans-Mississippi, has a is somewhat disconnected from the war in the East. Things going on in Louisiana and Texas and all the way out to California. There's your nod, Niels. It seems, and probably because, there's this lack of communication and it takes so long to get information from the Central West. When I say Central West, I mean Trans-Mississippi, Texas, Oklahoma Territory area, Iowa, Nebraska. The places don't exist yet as states, I don't think. Somebody look up and tell me when Nebraska was admitted to the Union. It seems anything going on in those places and further west into New Mexico and Arizona and California, Washington and Oregon, there's a huge disconnect to the rest of the war in the East. I don't know if how much the Red River campaign, I mean, I imagine most folks back in the East had never even heard of the Red River. Don't be shocked by that. But in that time period, I don't know how many people today even know where the Red River is.
Song, Red River Valley.
Well, yeah, there is a song called the Red River Valley. But in a lot of cowboy movies, but I don't know how many people would have connected with that in that time period. I don't know. You could disagree with that, and that's perfectly fine. Been a really long time since I have read anything about that part of the war. But I hope y'all are hanging out here with me on YouTube. I've played around with YouTube channels for a while now, and I think I'm just going to really work on this platform and continue to grow this and put more stuff on it as we come. And as we get done with this aviation project, I got a lot of work to do in the next month. I think I'm going to have to get an extension on that, but that's okay. We're going to work really hard, really hard. So that's kind of what's going on with here. If you got any questions this evening, please drop them in the chat, and we will, or you can just talk amongst yourselves. That's perfectly fine as well. And we'll see what we can do with those questions, history questions, and do some other things as well. As I said before, MJ is supposed to be joining us next Sunday night here on Sunday Night History Chat, and we will be talking about spies during the war. I'm going to be speaking in back at Pamphlet Park in October this year, and we're going to be, it's kind of like this guerrilla warfare spy type thing. And I'm not going to be talking about spies. I'm going to be talking about George W. Kirk and the war in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. But he was talking about how nobody's really doing a lot of work, scholarly work on spies these days. I think, and part of that, if a spy is really good, then you don't know about what's going on. For instance, that whole Culpeper spy ring, Washington spy ring, information on that didn't really come out until the 1930s. So if you are a good spy, as Harrison says in the movie of Gettysburg, nobody sees your work if you're really good at it.
Very hard on an actor.
Very hard on an actor. David Pope's got a new blog about Confederate soldiers from East Tennessee and some of the things they were fighting. Jason wants to know date for feeding A&V. All I've heard is January of next year. I had a map drawn for that a couple of weeks ago, and that's turned in. The images are turned in. I have seen the edits and gone through all of those, and it's just a waiting game. That's the way publishing works these days. Just the waiting game. Got some new Confederate related material, 1860s related material I've been working on kind of in the background. And look forward to sharing with you as well. Andrea's been reading about Elizabeth Van Lew, or researching. I've actually got a book about her back here someplace on the shelf. She was lived in Richmond, Virginia, and worked a lot with funneling information to the Federals and helping escape federal prisoners out of Libby prison. Andrea, maybe we should get together and talk about Van Lew sometime. That's a fascinating aspect of that time period. Richmond spy ring. I think there's also a book on the Atlanta spy ring. I don't have that one. I know, hard to believe, a book about that time period that I don't have, but there are a lot of them, trust me. Just a lot of them. John wants to know, do I know of any books about traveling photographers during the war? Well, there's only a couple in the South. I think one of them was named Sullivan, but don't quote me on that. I'll have to look that up. And then, of course, the famous two would be Matthew Brady and Gardner, I think it is. But, I mean, there were some photographers early in the war who visited the camps of the soldiers, both South and North, who would take images, and you could, in some places, go visit studios. But as far as purely on traveling photographers, of course, Matthew Brady and Gardner went to places like Sharpsburg and Gettysburg to take pictures. And there are photographers at Fort Fisher and in the Petersburg trenches. John, I can't think of one offhand that's purely on travel photographers. I don't think our friend Fred Taylor is with us this evening. I have not seen him pop up. Fred, if you are out there, drop us a note and tell us if there's anything on traveling photographers. And John, you're right. A lot of them did not. Some of them did have permanent studios, and some of them would just have a wagon with their chemicals in the wagons, and they would travel around and do some photographs. Early war. John, we need to sit down and contact Fred Taylor. He does. He lives in the I think the Norfolk area. But he may be the right person to ask on that. He is very involved with photography and the time period and has a wonderful collection of images. So we need to direct that question to him. So we'll get in touch with him, or I'll drop him a note when we get done this evening and see what we can do and what answer that we can come up with. But John, I will check into that and see. Bobby says there are some very interesting stories on gun duels. I actually, I have a list on my phone as I'm reading along. And anytime I come across something that I think would make a good post on looking for the Confederate War, or a good discussion for a evening chat just like this, I jot it down on that list. And there is actually one of them that deals with a duel. There are a couple of them that deal with duels between the Confederates, and that's something that we're going to work on in the near future. So another one of those interesting topics. Of course, there were Confederate officers that killed one another. Van Dorn comes to mind. There were federal officers who did the same thing. There was I think it was in Louisville, Elizabeth?
Yes. Bull
That
Nelson.
Bull Nelson.
Yeah. It's at the Galt Hotel.
Did he get killed, or was he the
He killed
killer?
the other guy.
Okay, he killed the other guy. Bull Nelson killed the other guy.
Yeah, I'll get you that.
But there's some pretty high-ranking episodes during the war of especially officer corps, both sides, who had ruckuses and felt their honor was impinged, and either fought a duel or just outright killed somebody. Nathan Bedford Forrest did that at least once.
Okay, no, he did. They did kill.
Okay, Elizabeth says Bull Nelson was the man who was killed
Details here.
in Louisville, Kentucky in 1862. Jason says there's the Marmaduke Walker. Yep. I have one on here that I was specifically thinking of. That's Calhoun and Rhett. Not John C. Calhoun, but another Confederate officer named Rhett. And there's our friend MJ. MJ, we were just talking to you about you. We're talking to you because you aren't here. How you're going to join us next Sunday night, and we're going to talk about spies and espionage and all those other great things. But right now we're on dueling during the war. Okay. Moving on.
Jefferson C. Davis shot him.
Oh, so Jefferson C. Davis shot Bull Nelson in Louisville, Kentucky, in the Galt House in 1860.
Hang on, which is actually
just 1860.
Yeah, in 18. Hang on, it's a big old thing. Sorry, this has got like a million days.
So it was during the war. So one of those, probably the most famous instance, that and Van Dorn. Van Dorn was killed by his
62.
Nelson
62.
Of course, there's the whole Dan Sickles episode too, with that man that was messing around with his wife, who was Francis Key Scott's nephew. It was all good, MJ. It was all good. There's Terry. State of Franklin programming. Terry, we didn't actually go to the State of Franklin event. We were like I said last weekend, we were hanging out and doing an event, and I have somebody over here that has to start grading finals, and I have somebody upstairs who has to take finals this upcoming week. And so and I was kind of behind. I still behind. Yep, Toombs challenged D.H. Hill to a duel. I see that's another fascinating subject we may have to dive into in a couple of weeks.
Murdered in the war.
Yeah.
Murder.
But next week we'll be talking about spies and espionage in that time period. This week we were talking about Confederate Air Force, and I already know, and on the post that I have that I'm going to put up tomorrow, that somebody has already said that there was a Confederate Air Force, and yes, there was a group called the Confederate Air Force in 1961, and they have now changed their name probably a decade ago to the Commemorative Air Force, and they restore World War II era aircraft and fly them around. Really cool. And it's actually really cool. Yes, I know there was a Confederate Air Force.
Otherwise, it sounds like alternate history. Like go back in time.
Yes.
Like Indiana Jones.
Sounds like alternate history. What's the title?
Dial of Destiny, where they go.
Guns of Turtle.
Guns of the South.
Guns of the South.
Yes.
No, alternate history. I mean, the man really did. Davidson really did have an idea to build this steam airplane and go bomb the Federal entrenchments in Petersburg.
Da Vinci had flying machine ideas.
Yeah, even Da Vinci had flying ideas. Arkansas outlawed dueling in 1820, but it continued past the war. It sure did. Famous duels, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton's famous duel. The man that my county that I live in is named for is the man who fought at the very first duel that Andrew Jackson ever fought in. I can see it's one of those fascinating subjects that y'all want to talk more about. We will have to get beyond our spy and espionage episode next week and talk a little bit more about dueling in that time period. I can see it's going to be a popular topic. So if you got any more thoughts or questions this evening, please drop me a line and we'll give a crack at it. Otherwise, we're going to sign off and maybe write a little bit more about some airplanes or work on some images or something this evening before we sign off and go to bed. I'll hang out here for just a couple of minutes. Thank you for showing up on this new platform. It's not new. I've been since the first of the year dropping quite a few of these dually on both Facebook channel and on the YouTube channel. John, thank you so much and congratulations, John. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining me here on Sunday Night History Chat, spending a few moments of your time with me. I look forward to it every week. And Lord willing, we will get together next Sunday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and chat history and talk a little bit about spies and espionage during the war. If you got any questions, drop me a line. If you come across this later, you need to go to michaelchardy.com and send me a note via my contact form because I don't check messages on YouTube very often. Please go and visit that and check it out. As always, keep researching, keep digging, keep sharing that history. And God bless.